Yeah, no nuclear power. Zippo, gone. No, not a possibility. Should never be done.
If you only care about yourself, if you only care short term, if you only care first cost, maybe not. If you care about the next generation, let alone 7 generations forward, if you care about anybody other than yourself, if you are willing to acknowledge the impact of your own activities, that they probably outweigh the benefit of your own activities, that your own existence, the way it's lived right now, has a pretty negative impact on the planet. If you're willing to acknowledge that and do the math and sort of add it up, or even just accept it, then it's necessary to move towards a different form of energy delivery and energy production.
Energy consumption is a huge part of our daily lives.
The amount of energy that we consume is massive, massive, massive.
But where does all this energy come from?
Nuclear currently generates about, or used to generate about 19% of the grid. So in America, as we now are shutting down plants, that percentage is going down.
We need to reduce our use of fossil fuels.
Done correctly, these sources of electricity can be used in a very, very mixed, intelligent way to create a great grid, stable grid that provides majoritatively clean electricity to the majority of America. Okay, so while I said 19% of the electricity generated in the grid comes from nuclear power, over 60% of the clean energy generated in this country comes from nuclear power. So you're talking about 60% equaling 19% of the grid. That means that in America right now, we are generating less than 40% clean power.
I would like to see nuclear as a transitional strategy, and I'm cautious about suggesting that, but I would say transitional 20, 40, maybe 60-year strategy to get us to the point where we can be way more efficient on the consumption end, and so demand less, but also develop renewables more fully.
I don't really know so much about it.
I don't know a lot. I know it's like,
Not much. I have lots of thoughts, but none of them are backed on anything factual.
So, how does a nuclear reactor work? Well, at the end of the day, its only job is to heat water and convert energy.
All right, so uranium, okay, this is what powers the vast majority of nuclear power plants around the country. It has an atomic number of 92 and then 238, okay? So the whole name of the game is fission.
Nuclear fission releases several million times more energy than any chemical reaction could.
Okay, or a large uranium atom, U-235, is struck by a neutron, okay? The energetic neutron causes this atom to then split in half, fission, okay? 2.7 additional neutrons are released, along with a bunch of energy. Now, the name of our game is arranging all of this and making a chain reaction so that one of these 2.7 neutrons strikes another uranium-235 atom, breaks that in half, 2.7 fly out of here. The next one strikes another uranium atom, breaks that in half, and all the time this is doing, heat is released, energy, and then you're converting the heat into energy. Okay. We do all this, we enrich it, we come up with gas, and then you translate it into a ceramic, UO2, uranium dioxide. Okay? Uranium dioxide is pressed, sintered into those pellets. Pellet is about the size of the tip of your pinky. Okay? In a typical reactor, these pellets are stacked in a fuel rod 12 feet tall. Okay? These fuel rods are then combined into a lattice, 17 by 17 of these fuel rods on the side. And if you looked at it up and down, it would look like this big, giant thing of tubes, and it would have some grids holding it all together, and then a big handle on the top for like the crane to lift it up and put it, and a nozzle on the bottom. Okay? So that's the fuel assembly. So this is pellet to rod, rod to assembly, and then this is what a quarter of a reactor core might look like. Each one of these squares would be one of these assemblies. So they're put into this big giant core like that. Now you have this big giant block of core. So here's assembly 1, assembly 2, assembly 3, and it'll be in a roughly cylindrical, circular arrangement. When I run water up through the bottom of this thing, the neutrons, they slow down enough so that they strike the next uranium atom, and then that one strikes the other one and strikes the other one, and what we want to maintain is a critical reaction. So when we break one uranium atom and its fission causes exactly one other uranium atom to break, we say that we are exactly critical. So NuScale Power is a nuclear startup, one of the new breed of nuclear startups that have come around in the last 10, 15 years. We're a private industry that is looking to license a new reactor design. A new concept, it's a smaller, scalable reactor, so whereas you're talking about 1,800, 900, 1,400 megawatt plants, enough power for 1 million homes. The NuScale SMR is designed to be for a smaller, more niche market. You're talking essentially maybe around 50 to 300,000 homes of power on a much smaller footprint. The NuScale SMR could end up lots of places where we don't currently see nuclear power in America or in the world. A small modular reactor essentially would most likely be on the order of around 50 to 300 to 400 to 500 megawatts and be scalable. So that's all that the concept of a small modular reactor is. A small modular, we are a light water technology, so light water is what the commercial reactor fleet in America is based on. It is the type of reactor design and type of reactor technology that humanity has the most experience with. But that's not to say that every nuclear submarine that ever operated in this planet couldn't be considered an SMR, and the Russians love to do liquid metal reactors, molten salt reactors, so all sorts of advanced concepts that were operated on small scales in the Navy, in military or non-commercial applications. So there's a wide history of SMR use. There's just never been a commercial option, and that's what we're pursuing right now. Unfortunately, the major things holding up nuclear in this country is not necessarily technology or public perception anymore. It's politics and economics. There is definitely future in the SMR. I do not believe that the SMR will replace or supplant the large commercial power plant. I do not believe that a grid ever made 100% nuclear or completely nuclear is the solution or is where we're headed.
Whether viewed positively or negatively, it seems most people have very firm opinions about nuclear power.
I lived through the 3 Mile Island.
I still remember 3 Mile Island, for goodness sake.
I'm sure you've heard about 3 Mile Island.
3 Mile Island, March 28th, 1979. They had a stuck-open relief valve. Operators didn't believe their indications. They started draining. Well, it turned out they were drawing a bubble, not in the pressurizer, but in the core. You're not supposed to draw a bubble in the core. You're supposed to keep the core covered with water. Actually, they got a core melt. This is not what fuel rods are supposed to look like. Consequences. No immediate deaths from 3 Mile Island. The radiation was, for the most part, contained. There was some release. It was relatively minor, but it was big news at the time. It was scary. No one knew.
In many ways, it is ignorance concerning nuclear energy that has cultivated a fear of the industry as a whole.
There are people in the nuclear industry who would say 3 Mile Island is actually the example of what went right. That is, things got so bad and yet there was no release of radiation into the public.
When you talk to people at plant sites or communities near plant sites, the majority of the opinion that you get is, I like my cheap electricity, I like it clean, this power plant is great jobs, there's tons of people in our community that work here, that stay employed because of this site. People in plant communities get it. Okay? People that have never, ever been anywhere adjacent to nuclear power or have never seen it, that tends to be the small group of people that are the most vocal against the technology.
I'm so not informed, but I would say no.
It's dangerous and probably not worth it. We don't seem to know how to handle these things. It's like children playing with matches.
It was freaky and creepy, and no. That's how I feel.
Despite a large population living in fear of nuclear energy, there are many equally steadfast in their support of this technology.
Nuclear power had 1.8 million lives saved over the course of the plants that have operated in our history at this point. Over those 60 years, they've saved 1.8 million lives because they haven't released the fossil fuel. And they'll save another 7 million before you decommission every plant that's currently in operation. So what does that mean? That means that these plants, Fukushima, Chernobyl, any of these that had an accident, saved more lives over the course of their operation than the accident and lives actually took. But you can't make that argument because it's a perception thing, because any one of these accidents was enough to shut the whole thing down and put tons of people out of work and change the entire paradigm for how we do things.
We do safety to avoid things like this, but nuclear is the safest of all power generation, including so-called renewable energy. And that's a fact.
When I was in school, more than 30 years ago, we were already talking about what's called inherently safe designs. Things that instead of you operating and needing to be continuously active to operate, if the entire plant staff just walks away and abandons the thing will naturally shut down. It needs essentially stimulus from an energy input and people actively working to keep it running so it won't melt down. There are ways that we've already developed that we can design nuclear plants that simply go, they are naturally passive and they will fail in a shutdown mode as opposed to fail in a greater and greater, more excited mode.
Something that has killed people can still be safe. People are still scared of people dying. For us to be standing around and always to be making the safety argument inherently has those people that we're trying to convince say, well, if he's always talking about safety, is it inherently unsafe? Because coal doesn't go around saying, look how safe we are. Oil doesn't go around saying, look how. The wind and solar industries don't go around saying, look at how safe we are. Even though many of those industries may be much more dangerous than nuclear power operation. But it's perception and semantics.
With new plants always under construction, safety is a huge topic amongst those employed in the nuclear industry.
If I have a tiny plant, then I'm less opposed to having it near me. The not in my backyard issue is minimized. The nice thing about having one big thing in one spot is it's easy to figure out where it is, and it's easy to control, and it's easy to manage, and it takes fewer people, and you can pay more attention to it. The downside about having a whole mess of little things sort of scattered all over the place is you may lose track of them. There's more people's fingers in the pie. They're harder to manage collectively, but you've distributed the use and you've distributed the risk, so the scale of the risk is smaller.
Progress for the nuclear industry will only occur with support from the government, and after being given a fair chance, public reaction could ensure its success or compromise its future altogether.
I would love to see the Department of Energy or the federal government come forward with some intelligence-based or intelligently based subsidy program for all of energy in this country, because I can generate nuclear power cheaper than the subsidy for wind and solar, but I can't beat the fossil fuels, and wind and solar can now compete with me because they have this massive subsidy. What should be being done is that rather than being a unique wind subsidy, a unique solar subsidy, there should be a clean energy subsidy there.
So as we move towards more and more renewable energy, which we must, the energy density gets lower and lower. So we are going to deal with lower and lower grade and take up more and more real estate for that same amount of energy. We need to be aware of that. So the more important thing, the first thing we need to do is to reduce our energy use, and then to deliver it more efficiently, and then to produce it renewably. Another important concept to appreciate is that providing energy on the scale that we currently want it, no matter what form, is going to have a big impact environmentally. So if we provided energy, all wind, or all solar, or all tidal wave motion, it's going to take a lot of space. If we provided all nuclear, it might take less space, but it's going to be very high energy intensity. It may involve mining. It may involve other things that we find distasteful. It may involve drilling holes in the ground or taking risks with people's lives in different ways. But the amount of energy that we consume is massive, massive, massive. So again, the first thing we need to do is reduce the scale of energy use. I don't want to first tell people that they need to cut back on comfort, although when I see people wearing t-shirts on a very cold wintry day, I think, geez, we should turn down the heat. We should get you to the point where at least you're wearing a sweater and a sweatshirt. Most of the saving the planet stuff that we want to do isn't about new technology. It's about rules. It's really about giving permission and not unfettered, no constraints, but it's about figuring out how do we do this in a way that allows us to go forward in a safe and thoughtful way. All right, that's when I've meditated on this for the past 2-3 decades. That's kind of what I've come up with, and especially the most recent years. A lot of the sustainability issues that we're facing, I don't need a whole lot of new technology, maybe a little bit. But that's not really where the cutting edge is. The cutting edge is on figuring out the rules, on figuring out what rules we can all apply and agree on. It won't be on a mass scale. It'll be you telling 3 people and me telling as many people who will sit still and listen to me. If you only care about yourself, if you only care short term, if you only care first cost, maybe not. If you care about the next generation, let alone 7 generations forward, if you care about anybody other than yourself, if you care about anybody other than sort of rich, white, upper middle class, Western, whatever we want to say, we live much better than the rest of the world, almost all the rest of the world. If you are willing to acknowledge the impact of your own activities, that they probably outweigh the benefit of your own activities, that your own existence, the way it's lived right now, has a pretty negative impact on the planet. If you're willing to acknowledge that and do the math and sort of add it up, or even just accept it, then it's necessary to move towards a different form of energy delivery and energy production.